Hello, I'm going to talk to you today about the gorilla Mokawunje and how gorilla histories can help us decolonise our collections. Some of you may have heard me talking about Mokawunje before. Also known as Mok, he was a western lowland gorilla whose remains are in the collection of Leeds Museums and Galleries. His taxidermied skin is displayed at Leeds City Museum, while his skeleton is in the store at Leeds Discovery Centre, which is where we are now. His remains in the Life on Earth Gallery at the Leeds City Museum are currently used as an example of his species, but they have the potential to tell us a lot more about gorillas and their histories. Mok arrived in Leeds in 1938 after his death at London Zoo, where he had lived with his friend Marina from 1932. I became interested in what Mok's life was like before his remains reached us, and used archives from the Zoological Society of London, the Natural History Museum, and the Archives Nationales d'Outre-mer, as well as French and British press archives, to find out more. On the left, here you've got a picture of Mok and Marina. Mok is on the right-hand side of that picture, shortly after they arrived at London Zoo. On the right as well is a picture of the two of them in their enclosure with the public looking at them. In the middle is a picture of Mok recovering from pneumonia, which he got shortly after his arrival at the zoo. But luckily he recovered after round-the-clock care from his keepers. London Zoo had bought the gorillas, Mok and Marina, from a French colonial administrator, André Capegorry, who had kept them as pets in the former French Congo, which is now the Republic of the Congo, as opposed to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. On the left here is the zoo card with a little bit of information about Mok's previous owner. In the middle is a little snippet I found in his staff archives in France, thanks to a volunteer that I didn't go to France, which pleased me rather because his height when he entered the army was 1.71 metres, which is basically the size of a bipedally standing male gorilla, but anyway. This little snippet is a news report about Mok and Marina. It tells us about the diet they received when they were pets, and apparently they were also trained to use cutlery. It also appears from this that it was Madame Capegorry who was really the one in charge of the gorillas. Yes, as I mentioned here, that they ate chicken broth, fish, raw eggs, grapes, bread and butter, fruit and cucumbers. So not a good diet for gorillas generally. This is an image not of Mok, but of a baby gorilla on a steamer called the Foucault. It's actually the boat that Capegorry and the gorillas travelled on. The following journey would have been the one that Mok was on. So it's interesting to get a hint there of how many gorillas may have been leaving the country. It also says here that it was against the law to export gorillas or to keep them. So Capegorry was actually breaking the law and selling Mok and Marina to the zoo. So to begin with, I was interested to find out more about Mok's life as a gorilla taken from the wild, kept as a pet, and his long journey to London, as well as his experiences at the zoo. But the more I looked into different sources, the more it became apparent that the interaction between gorillas and humans during colonial times can tell us new things about relationships between colonised and colonising communities. Gorillas as a species are closely linked to empire. Scientific knowledge of lowland gorillas built as European powers scrambled for Africa, and mountain gorillas were not discovered by Europeans until 1902. This was all happening against a backdrop of new ideas about human evolution and race. By entering colonial homes, gorillas enable us to look at racial and gendered hierarchies imposed by European colonisers from a new perspective. A lot of work has been done on great white hunters, their impact on gorilla populations, and of course on colonised Africans. The existence of gorillas and other animals in our museum collections in Britain is closely linked to colonialism and to violence. I'm not going to say any more on this because I know Rachel Jennings will be speaking later, and I suspect she may well touch on this. Suffice to say, colonised Africans were exploited on a large scale, sometimes at great risk to themselves, in the collection of gorillas. The goal of acquiring the gorillas, wanted for museums, and indeed personal hunting ambitions, seemed to take precedence over the health and well-being of African employees. In hunting gorillas for trophies or museums, baby and young gorillas were often accidental, albeit inevitable, collateral. Most young gorillas died shortly after being separated from their families. A small proportion of young gorillas made it to Europe or to America alive. This is thought to be less than 1 in 25, either bound for zoos or less often as pets. Some young gorillas were specifically targeted for the live animal trade. Although not in the same numbers as gorilla hunting, it appears that the exploitation of African people continued, albeit in different forms, in the capture and care of live gorillas. This image here is of a pair of gorillas, Ngagi and Congo. This image is from a book by Martin Johnson, who with his wife Osa Johnson made the film Congorilla, which actually was shown to Moka when they were at London Zoo. They captured these 2 young gorillas during their filming work and decided to keep them. They hired 2 African people, men, to take care of them, took these men as well as the gorillas to America, to New York. The crossing was so dangerously hot that some people actually died on the journey, but happily everyone survived the journey in terms of the gorillas and the African staff and the Johnsons. The African men were hired to take care of them, and they stayed for 3 months in New York, working from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, looking after the gorillas. I don't know what happened to them. I think their passage back to Africa was paid for, but whether or not they were able to rejoin their families, I do not know. The gorillas ended up going from Central Park Zoo in New York to San Diego Zoo, where they had more space. Apparently the Johnsons regretted taking them from the wild. But you know, maybe could have thought of that a little in advance. This image is taken in the former French Congo by another filmmaker. He was trying to get some gorilla footage for a Clark Gable film. This is Monsieur and Madame Mercier. So Monsieur Mercier is a district commissioner at Makua. And this little gorilla was brought to him a few days earlier by some African hunters who had found it abandoned by its mother. So they put it, also it was put in the book. Presumably either the mother was killed in the hunt or fled and wasn't able to bring the baby with her. They endeavoured to look after the little gorilla for a while. Madame Mercier seemed to be in charge of this, feeding him, changing him, but then said it was like raising a human baby and took too much attention, too much time. So it was sent to Brazzaville Zoo before it became too attached. Comparatively little is known about young gorillas kept in captivity in Africa. In trying to find out more about how Mok's life as a pet may have been, I found some useful snippets from different sources, which together can help us construct a history of captive gorillas in Africa. While colonial wives in particular seem to have formed real bonds with young gorillas in their homes, the day-to-day tasks of gorilla care were to a great extent carried out by African staff. In an account by Ernst Zilling, an Austrian writer or explorer, he came across a French couple while he was trying to find a temporary home for a young gorilla he'd captured. And this French couple owned a sawmill, and they already had a female gorilla named Kiki. Kiki had been a pet of theirs, but when she'd grown too large, which obviously gorillas do, and too powerful to keep as a pet, she was put in a cage, which she lived in all the time. A little hint of the kind of work that African staff were hired to do in the care of gorillas. Kiki had her own guard who fetched food from the jungle for her and kept a fire burning at night to keep away mosquitoes. Although this might not be as dangerous or risky as perhaps trying to hunt gorillas, the impact of having to work nights must have been substantial. The couple wanted to return to France for health reasons, but they wouldn't leave without Kiki. So they did clearly care about her, even if they couldn't offer a very good life. The physical exploitation of African people was in some cases much more fundamental. So this image is very striking for a lot of reasons. This is taken by Armand Dennis, who was a filmmaker. He managed to get a license to export 30 gorillas to start a breeding colony in America. He already had a breeding colony of chimpanzees. No gorillas had bred in captivity at this point. This was during the Second World War. He offered money for live gorillas, thinking that he was saving them from certain death, but presumably encouraging the trade in live gorillas somewhat. This little day-old gorilla was brought to him after a hunt. He didn't really know what to feed it because there wasn't milk available, but the chief of a nearby village offered one of his wives as a wet nurse, is how they put it. Apparently the girl had no objection, and the little gorilla lived among the children in the chief's household until the expedition to capture more gorillas moved on. 30 gorillas in total were caged, taken to Brazzaville in the bottom of the Republic of Congo, then to Matadi in what's now the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Belgian Congo as it was then. All of them died before leaving Africa. This little one, who'd been a day old when it was caught, was the last to die. In another book by an animal collector, Peter Reinier, he included an account of hiring African women to breastfeed baby gorillas captured for illegal trade to America. Any unweaned babies were sent to live with African wet nurses, and these quotes tell us a little about how these women were treated. I'll just leave you to read them. There's no point me reading them out because you can all read. So these quotes tell us a little bit about the impact on women. They were potentially taken from their homes, really treated like livestock to some extent. And I'd be interested to know what the impact was on their children. Presumably women who were able to produce milk would have had children of suckling age, so this would have affected the supply of milk to their children. I also wonder whether there were any health risks involved. Certainly, obviously we know that a disease can spread from humans to gorillas, and it can also spread the other way around. So by suckling infant gorillas, were the wet nurses women potentially passing on diseases to their young babies? The history of gorillas and their encounters with humans can also tell us about domesticity in colonies, the interaction between colonists and colonised communities, as well as the illegal hunting and trade of gorillas, which continues today. This is a picture of a little gorilla found in Cameroon that had been captured illegally to sell as a pet. The remains of animals from once colonised countries have the potential to reveal stories not only of their own experiences, but of the people whose lives were affected by colonisation. Even today, the colonial nature of conservation of gorillas and other species continues to impact the quality of life of many African people in a way that may not be sustainable for people or wildlife. We can use gorilla histories to engage our audiences with a range of political and environmental issues still relevant today, and as a tool to decolonise our collections. I have just begun a PhD looking at this. I have some of you on my sites, but if you have a gorilla in your collection that may have been kept alive in Africa before reaching a museum, I will be very, very happy to do some digging for you, and please let me know and I can get in touch. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back everybody, and we should have Rebecca Makin with us now with sound issues sorted for a 5-minute question and answer session before we move on to our next session. There was only one question for Rebecca, which was around how we tell that story, how you are considering you tell that story in the museum, whether you're showing pictures, how you deal with different audiences seeing it. There was a very related question in the chat, which is about, should the focus be on morality and the lack of ethics around practice in cross-species activities, this kind of human versus animal focus. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that yet, or whether you had any thoughts on questions that you're going to be asking or communities you're going to be working with to explore how best to present this challenging history.
Right, first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, thank goodness. I thought it might all go wrong again. Yes, apologies that I didn't give a trigger warning. Yes, you're quite right, it hadn't even occurred to me, so I'm sorry if anyone was upset by that. Yes, at the moment we are planning to reinterpret some of our displays at Leeds City Museum over the coming years. And yes, as yet we don't know quite how that will take shape. But at present our Life on Earth gallery is very much a family space, very child-centred. So we would have to think very carefully about how we would tell that kind of story. Having said that, I don't think it's necessarily something that should be censored too strongly, because, you know, it links to the way that we treat gorillas and other wildlife today, and how our lives are linked to them. So yes, in terms of the ethics and morality, I mean, that's something I'm hoping to look at more with my research, is the way that having captive gorillas in Africa, pet gorillas especially, entering colonial homes, it's an interesting way of looking at the way that hierarchies of race were imposed by colonizers, and gender as well. You know, gorillas were brought into homes and given wine and meat and all sorts of things that weren't any good to them, but they were well fed and well looked after. They had their own beds, they were given clothes, while at the same time colonized African children were, you know, in many cases incredibly poor, with very little protection from disease or balanced diet, that sort of thing. So I'm also mindful that gorillas as a species are very evocative in terms of racism, because gorillas are often used as an offensive term. Well, not often, but yes, sadly, too frequently used as an offensive, racist term. So we also need to be careful that in telling gorillas' histories, we're not doing that at the expense of Black Africans' histories. So I hope by combining the two, we don't let one eclipse the other in a way that would just make things even worse. Yes.
Thank you so much. We just really appreciate people who are actively working on this, sharing their practice. And as Miranda and Subhadra started the day, it's just so important to be exposing these histories and then thinking, how do we tell this truth? How do we learn from this truth, this challenging truth, to challenge these systems that still exist today? So thank you so much for your time, really appreciate it. I'm sorry we had some technical issues, but we got there.
They were all in my hand, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to leave now. I was just chairing session 1, but I'd like to introduce David Gelthswarp from the NATSCA committee, who will be chairing session 2.